And also, right, once you start scaling, there is a point where you feel that, okay, I need to make some optimization as well as in my code, right? So, what are some of the things that you normally do when you feel that, okay, it's the right time for me? What are some of the considerations you have to make those optimizations?
Um, so I don't know about you guys. I'm kind of a data freak. So like one of the things I do when I have not well, I don't have that much free time at work. When I do, I'm literally on my graphs. Those application specific KPIs I was talking about. I really think about, hey, what can we tune here? I'm like, hey, is my cache miss rate a little higher than I thought? Is there something I can tune here? I go to my DynamoDB, look at my provision, like capacity. Hey, like, look at all the graphs in CloudWatch and go, hey, like, can I extract a little bit more over here? But in terms of like the timing and when to do it, I always tell people do it as early as possible, because one of those things, like, I mean, for those coders out here, right? Performance only gets worse as you add more lines of code. So like if you start off in like a high bar, then it can only get worse from there. So you really push yourself to kind of write tight code at the beginning. And personally for me, I also come from an embedded development background where I don't have much memory and much CPU, so I always try to write compact software.
And also, just adding to that, right? So you just mentioned that all of a sudden you start with very less lines of code, and then what we often seen is that with startup, right, it can grow at a very faster pace. For example, today say you're making $100 million revenue, it could be possible that the very next month you hit a 400 million revenue number, right? In that case, how do you guys make sure that the technology is aligned with the growing business need?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think about it in terms of. I mean, the revenue numbers are great, but I try to take myself away from that, because the technology should work regardless of that kind of scale on the monetary side. My goal has always been to develop scalable solutions that are stable and have the least amount of fault as possible. So for me, it's very much the same. I still continue to design things as with horizontal scaling in mind first, and then just have the ability to vertically scale it just in case I need it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, what advice would you like to give our all users? Because since you have done a startup successfully, what are some of the key services of AWS that they might consider if they wanted to grow their own startup, right?
Yeah.
So, what is your take on that?
Nice plug. Nice plug for yourself. Well, I mean, just if you are just I think between just really common things like between EC2 and RDS, you can probably change the world already, to be honest. But if you really ask me what is kind of the secret sauce, and I'll share it with you guys and to the world, I think between things like Kinesis Analytics, Kinesis Stream, and Lambda, you can do some pretty cool stuff in real time. And there's so many possibilities there of just developing some cool algorithms that just because it's just so reactive to things that it could be something very special.
And also, right, everyone goes through this phase that you may have some rocky moments, right? It should not be smooth at all point of time. So, could you mind sharing some of that? Like, what are some of the learnings that you have when you were growing, or if you had some rocky phase?
Sure. I think, man, it's getting very personal here. The rocky phases. I think for me, it's I learned a lot about myself through the process. I've worked at some very large companies before. I've even led some pretty large engineering teams. But when you're kind of running a startup as a co-founder, you don't really always have a full support system you can turn to. Like when you're working at a large company, there's always someone above you that can kind of give you some guidance. For me, like you get to a point where you don't know something, you better figure it out, kind of thing. But I think through that process, I'm sure some of you guys can relate. So through that process, you actually learn a lot about yourself, and you can figure out, man, you can exceed your own expectation for things. So while I think that portion of it was rocky, I think I am a better person for having gone through it. Yeah.
So we're getting some live questions from Slido, so I would like to read some of them. So one of the question is that how do you prepare for unexpected demand load spike in the system? I would like to take this answer. So we have a great tool called auto scaling. You should leverage that. So it's pretty simple, straightforward. Okay, so
I agree.
so let me ask you this question, right? What was it easy for you to move from Azure to AWS?
Okay. Oh, that's a great question. That's part of my migration slides, but I didn't throw Azure there in case you guys didn't notice. I think it was pretty straightforward. The amount of services that basically I can find a one-to-one mapping for most of the things I was using on Azure and on AWS. So moving the stuff was straightforward in terms of mapping the services. I did have to change some application logic code, obviously, but actually after everything got moved, things were faster in some areas. So I got some unexpected positive benefit from the move. Yeah.
We have not touched this topic yet. So what are some of the monitoring tools that you have implemented today
Okay.
on this platform?
On this platform, like internally?
Yes.
Yeah. So I use this service called Hosted Graphite. So it basically does like stats D and collect D kind of things. So in our application, we identify the KPIs that we want to monitor, and we actually add lines of code to increment counters and timers in our system. Then we have like these beautiful dashboards that one of my engineers makes, and then graphs all the stuff for us. So that's when I was talking about monitoring tools, I was talking about tools like that. Our competitors like Datadogs also does something very similar, and they also have a pretty cool product.
Also, what about DR? So what's your DR strategy? Have you considered multiple region, multi-AZs, or how does the architecture look like when?
Yeah, so on RDS side, we just take care of multi-AZ just because it's a simple flip of a switch. We do some stuff with multi-region. So we do have stuff, because I have a lot of clients in Asia, so we actually have a cluster in Singapore, and then we actually shoot the data over to Firehose over in another region. So that's how we kind of move data back and forth between things.
We have a few questions coming on MongoDB.
Okay.
So was it challenging for you to move MongoDB, or how was that journey?
That was an interesting challenge. I think MongoDB is a great product. The challenge for me when I was talking about MongoDB earlier, to clarify, was really about the self-hosting that I had to do on it. That was probably something I wouldn't recommend for anyone that wants to keep all the hair and sanity. But other than that, moving over to a cloud solution, it was also like very straightforward. There was also some pretty good products for one-to-one mapping. Yeah.
That's a very interesting question. So, and we have seen that happening with many other startups as well. So many of the startups do not really have AWS experience, or they don't really understand, because now we have over 100 plus products and service, and we keep on launching new service.
Yeah.
Every new and then.
I
right?
took that certification course. I know.
Exactly. So what is your secret sauce for that, right? How do you start?
How do I pick the right service?
Sometimes it becomes confusing, right?
Yeah,
we have so many services. For example,
it does,
database, like we have so many of them.
Yeah.
And how do you train your people?
Yeah. So I mean, actually, I think AWS does a pretty good job on not just marketing their features from just your support documents, but you guys have a lot of great blog posts.
Discover how you can make a difference in your community and country, serving part-time in the Army National Guard. Visit nationalguard.com/community.
Some things on example use cases, so I actually follow those quite a bit personally. I'm pretty specific with what I want with things, so I would just kind of search out, hey, like what's another person in this space doing to solve a similar problem, and I generally tap into looking at AWS forums and things like that to see what's like a technology I can fit into here.
Just a follow-up question has just come on this. So what do you feel that what's the learning curve for AWS, and where would you recommend startups to focus on first?
Personally, for me, I thought the learning curve was pretty good. It's not that bad. The beauty of it is there's so much online documentation with AWS services and features that it's pretty easy to get started. There's also, I mean, we don't use a lot of this, but there's a lot of one-click solutions to get things up and going on AWS. Yeah.
So another question that came up is that how many accounts you have in AWS, and did you have any problem in managing those accounts?
So I have 3 accounts in AWS right now. Well, maybe 5. But I don't have any problem with it. I mean, it's pretty simple. Everything is kind of siloed in its own account. The only thing that Consolidate Billing does is just charges one credit card. But other than that, it's pretty straightforward. You can switch between them if you configure your roles correctly.
Okay.
Yeah.
But again, we have some startups that have grown from AWS, and now they are pretty big enterprise. For example, Airbnb, they started from AWS as a startup. So we have some customers, they have over 1,000 of AWS account, right? For example, for different business unit, there's a different account. So we have a product called AWS organizations for those who are not aware of that, and that really takes care of managing multiple accounts, managing the IAM policies across multiple accounts. Depends on what kind of user you are. If you're a developer, what kind of privileges you will have, how you are going to interact with different accounts. So that deals with that. So if you're not aware of that, just look at the service called AWS organization that takes care of that. Have you ever considered sharing the load across multiple clouds? And often we see this buzzword is now multiple cloud, say for running the workload or for a DR purpose. Have you ever evaluated that?
I had for a while, and actually we were doing something similar like that between Azure and AWS. Ultimately, I didn't necessarily want it. That complexity wasn't required for the business I was running, so I didn't end up like pursuing that path that much further. But I have heard of people doing that. Yes.
Another question that came up is that, can you talk a little bit more about the complicated legacy architecture that you adopted previously?
Okay. Yeah, so I think at the very beginning, we were figuring out our ML strategy. We were trying to do some of this on Cortana essentially, and but not just that, but we integrated with a lot of other kind of third-party service providers that either has brought us down before because they have various downtimes and things like that, and they weren't stable. And over time, it just didn't make sense to kind of keep all that load around. It was mostly due to a lot of features that we thought at the beginning was going to be really popular, but didn't become popular. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying about, hey, you should really focus on the vision of what you're trying to build and really ask the right questions there. But from moving to that to AWS was what I was saying was a lot of was one-to-one mapping on things and changing some application logic code.
Now coming back to AWS, right? When you deployed the new architecture, now how much variation you see in the load? Do you see a very steady kind of load, or it's a very different kind of spike? And how do you manage that?
I think the load, in general, we're pretty, since we've been doing this for a while, our load is pretty predictable. Like we can tell, you know, if we're getting this much more clicks through our system, how much more I need to add to my spot instances already. So in that portion of it is pretty predictable. With the migration going in, we haven't moved, to be honest, I haven't moved to full production workload on it yet, but I expect it to be very similar. In terms of for the planning that we've done.
So there's one more question: that are there any tips for scaling the monolithic application?
Sorry, what?
Monolithic application.
Oh, tips of scaling a monolithic application. Yeah. Okay. The term monolithic depends on how big. I don't know how big you're talking about here.
I think most likely we are talking about 10 years back, right? Because
10 years.
Nowadays,
yeah, okay.
I don't think so anyone uses that technology. So
yeah.
Even if you're really considering using a monolithic technology, I think you should really look at some of the serverless technologies or this.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I think that's one of the points where I was, I wouldn't call what I first did with the proof of concept as monolithic, but I think it would be something very similar. Like at some point when you go into production, I didn't mention this in my slides, but I was thinking about it earlier on, was like, you don't really want to go out the gate with your product. Like, let's say you had a super awesome proof of concept and you're about to go production. The last thing you want is to have a bad user experience because you didn't plan for the load. So, I mean, I remember at the beginning, I had a lot of pressure from my investors. Hey, like, you know, when are you gonna launch thing? When are you gonna get this ready? When are you gonna start selling? And then I remember not pushing enough back because I know I needed to scale better before that happened. And ultimately that was not the greatest decision. So that's why I would say, hey, like it's important to, before you move your proof of concept to production, or in this case, move your monolithic service to like a new kind of infrastructure, to think about scaling early on and find that out.
So there's one more question: that can you talk about some of the strategies you use to scale your data? Like, did you do partitioning? Did you do caching?
Yeah, so all of the above. So yeah, the thing I did my master's in was actually in kind of this database thing. So we use a combination of technologies. We use Redshift for some of our data warehousing things, and we use MySQL. But on top of that, we've also added other layers. We kind of have determined over time what is a very active working set for the data that needs to be hot, and so we keep some of that data in a Redis cache. Also, we've done things to know, hey, this is the kind of patterns that our customer use in terms of querying our data. So we do some pre-aggregation of data as well and kind of put that into another database so that the summation of those things could become a lot faster. But some of this stuff is hard for me to give a general strategy. It really depends on you studying how your data is used and consumed and kind of developing a plan around that so you could give a very custom tailored solution for that. Because I think anytime you talk about optimizing and going from things that are generic optimization to things that's like blazing speed, always involves some sort of know-how and understanding how your clients, need your data so you can kind of give them these tailored solutions.
How do you develop your KPIs? Coming back to, it's a very performance driven, right? So what are some of the...
Sure. Other than trial and error, the other way I do it is really think about may not be too popular, but I listen to my clients actually. I listen to what they care about. Because sometimes the things they care about, I don't even think about. Because for me, I think about things like, oh man, what's my millisecond response time from like point A to point B, server A to server B, They don't think about it in that terms. A lot of times they're like, man, Eric, my conversion rate on my offer is going down. Oh man, I'm not making as much money today as I did yesterday. What did you change? And I have to take that and go, okay, well, maybe I know what happened. I added this layer over here and this increased your transaction time by half a second. Though that's probably why you lost, you made less money today than yesterday. So from there, I take kind of input from them and I try to develop my own inspiration and bring KPIs out of that. So, I think, if I ask you guys all to generate like engineering level KPIs, I'm sure you can think about those things like all day long. But I think sometimes the key nuggets of things that I found out that the greatest KPIs I had actually came from listening to some of the customers and what they have to say.
So one more thing, right? We often see that architecture is something which is always evolving, because what happens is that you keep on adding new functionalities, you need to tweak the architecture a little bit, or you need to add some of the services, or you may have to scale the architecture. So how often do you re-architect or consider looking at the architecture one more time, or how do you have a process on that, or how often you work with developer to see that are we in an optimal state or can we make it even better?
Yeah, that's always a great question. So that to me, I interpret that question as, when do you decide it's time to refactor your software, or if the thing is already working, why mess with something that's already working? So I think for me personally, I'm not the kind of CTO that sees the newest shiniest technology and just go like run to it. Because I do have a business to maintain, I do have customers that I'm responsible for. But what I do to experiment with new technologies is I would generally try to create a new side project, or I would say, hey, this one part, this new feature, or this new idea, why don't we try this new thing? And if it is good, then I will try to bring it back more into my main product.
So security is one of the biggest concerns, right, for everyone, because you often see that data breaches or someone hacking to the servers. So how you are making sure that overall architecture or everything is secured? What are some of the tips you'd like to give our users?
So when I think about security, I think about it. Basically, how high the risk is for attack, also the severity of the attack if it were to happen. And so I always try to always address the things as high severity and high impact on the risk factor. So it comes down to hardening your security of your infrastructure and who has access to it, creating your right IMA rules and things like that. But also from a client perspective, really basic things. Enforce tough passwords, right? Make them change their passwords. Like these are simple things that I wish more people do. But that's a great question. Yeah.
So we did not hear Dockers or containers, some keywords from your presentation. So are you not considering that? If yes,
oh no, we definitely are considering that. Okay. Actually, that's an initiative that we're doing recently. Actually, the way that our software scales right now, we're still trying to find the right metric in terms of tuning it for how much storage or how much CPU we need to kind of figure out the right balance there. So that's a great example. That's one of those things that we're spinning up a separate project on, so we can test and figure that out while we keep our main product going on kind of existing.
And how big is the infrastructure team versus development team?
I don't really think of it that way. So there's certainly people in my team that are very more capable on the infrastructure side and more on the development side, but I try to spread the development task and work in my team so that everyone kind of gets a little bit of intermix everything. So it's, I kind of think of it this way, like, people the same way, like, shouldn't have a single point of failure. So in general, everyone should know a little bit about everything.
So there's an interesting question. Can you offer more information on how specifically you scale horizontally? Be specific, like stateless as possible, or what are some of the other techniques that you use?
Okay. I mean, stateless is really the biggest thing, right? Like we really try to develop our servers that need to scale horizontally to not have the data, not enforce the data to be locally stored in the server. So that's the stuff that gets pushed off to like a RedSQ or even DynamoDB or something like that, where it can have a quick lookup. And that really is the key. And then relying SQS is really big for us. We used to kind of manage a lot of our own queues ourselves too, which was also not a great idea. But to rely on SQS, which is very reliable, we're able to spread our batch processing like very horizontally across the board. Just spin up more backend servers within servers. Yeah.
Do you do any kind of edge computing?
No, that's not something I really.
So there's another question. Could you share us your team's learning curve and moving from containers to EC2? Sorry, from EC2 to containers.
EC2 to containers. Team's learning curve. Well, if I'm invited back here in maybe in a month's time, I can give you the answer. But we're still kind of in that phase right now. So the person I'm working on it also has certification in AWS, just like me. So we're kind of going back and forth on what the best strategy is there right now. Yeah.
So software as a service is a pretty interesting space, and it's hard to define the end product. Could you just explain your journey on that?
Yeah, you're right. That's a very generic term. Basically, everything that's a platform online is kind of a software as a service, right? So my journey on that is you got to. I think there's something I still kind of struggle with. Is I try to figure out if we're a B2B company or a B2C company sometimes when I think about SaaS. But then it's just like it's so intermixed. So my journey there really just consists of figuring out what my target clients were and target market was, and I do try to listen to my clients a lot, but figuring out what they need was kind of the rockiest part. But once you got to get that right, it becomes easier to kind of maintain that focus on what to build for your SaaS product.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, right? You listen to clients very often. So now the question is, how do you balance between premature optimization versus getting the new features released as soon as possible? And that's even the common problem that we also have,
sure,
right? We keep
yeah.
on releasing new and new features.
Yeah. I try to. It's kind of floating number in my head, but I actually try to split it in a way where it's half-half. I know that sometimes doing the things like maintenance work or upgrading things is not necessarily the sexiest thing you can do, right? But it's required part of engineering. So I try to split up the team half-half, where half of it is developing new features and half of it is trying to build out infrastructure, build a scale.
Are you using any denial of service protection, any services on that particular aspect?
We do have some things built into how we configure our Nginx servers and things like that, but nothing like a separate service. That hasn't really been like a risk in our products at this time, so not too much time spent on it.
Okay, it's an interesting question. It's putting you on spot.
Okay.
Is AWS Solutions Architecture certification enough to do as a CTO?
I don't know. I guess my team can answer that question for me. Well, I also have a lot of credentials. If you want my resume? No. I mean, yeah. I'm just kidding. I think it definitely enhances it. I think just to be able to know what you have to play with, it's a lot. It probably helps you to kind of figure out what pieces to use. But I mean, having a technical degree, I have an engineering degree. definitely helps. Useful.
It's a very generic question.
Yeah,
What
that's funny.
instance type did you use?
Sorry, what?
What instance type did you choose?
Oh, instance type did I choose?
Yeah, and why?
Okay. I use a lot of instance type, but I would probably choose, I don't know, T2 largest, because I like to share my resources, and I think I'm kind of big.
So what is the strategy after choosing instance type? Do you go for reserved instance immediately, or you try to wait till you know that this is the kind of instance is optimal, then you go for a reserved instance? So what
Oh, how do I
advice-
go from to like an on-demand to reserve?
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that's probably part of capacity planning for me. I don't usually go right away. I usually kind of wait a quarter out first to make sure that the thing I planned and projected will actually materialize and what I think will happen. But like I said, if you're wrong, there's ways to get around that. But in general, I think I wait 3 months or so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The next question is that what do you do for high availability and DR?
Height availability and DR. To be honest, no, I don't really know how to answer that question. I'm not
That's
sure.
perfectly
Yeah,
fine.
Yeah.
But again, those who are not really aware that we do have inbuilt HA solutions in all our offerings, right? So we have multi-AZ that even if you use multi-AZ architectures and you spin off two EC2 instance, you by default get HA if you choose to host one EC2 server in one AZ and other EC2 server in other AZ. Similarly, for all the services that we have, RDS or anything, you will see that HA is built on most of the services that we have, almost all the services that we have. And using multi-region, you can also extend HA to DR in your architecture. I think that was the last question that I have. Looks like. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, that was great.
Okay.
So what are some of the final tips you'd like to give?
Final tips. Have fun.
That was really great.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much, Eric,
Yeah,
for
thank you.
talking with us. We really
Yeah.
had a very good time.
Yeah. Appreciate it.